This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Coming up on This Week in Agribusiness, farmers in America's Northeast work to harvest their crop after a troublesome season. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. Across the country this year, farmers have been grappling with drought and issues of dryness. But in America's Northeast, they've been dealing with a different set of troubles. American Agriculturalist editor Chris Torres joins us now. Chris, thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Mike, it's great to join you here from Lancaster, PA.
You're in Lancaster, PA, Chris. American Agriculturalist. What's the territory you cover with that magazine?
American Agriculturalist covers a very broad territory. So we cover a territory starting essentially down on the Delmarva Peninsula, which is Maryland, Delaware, and we go through all the Northeast states all the way up through to Maine.
So over this growing season, farmers in the Northeast have faced very different challenges than growers in a lot of other parts of the country with drought and dryness. I understand your growers were dealing with wetness this year. Chris, is that right?
It depends on where you're at. For the most part, the season actually started out very, very dry. I'm based here in Pennsylvania, and there are areas here in the state. Harrisburg, PA experienced its driest May in history. There was about 3 or 4 weeks there in May and going into June where you just did not see a drop of rain. And the good news is that for those farmers, the rains did come in time for the most important time of the season in terms of corn and soybeans. And we were able to get some rain to get those crops out of the ground. In places like Vermont, especially northern Vermont, central and northern Vermont, they got a little bit too much rain and there was some terrible flooding up there. Thousands of acres were lost. I talked to a grower not too long ago from the northern part of Vermont, and his farm, he lost 300 acres because of terrible flooding, and it's led to a lot of problems in terms of growers being able to have, especially dairy farmers, being able to get enough hay and enough other feed for the winter. That's
true. Those feed costs are a concern. That's true everywhere, it seems. Chris, the other question I've got for you, in your part of the country, I know there are a lot of direct-to-consumer, farm-to-market type operations, apples in particular. What have you heard this year? Have they fared okay?
I think apples have fared okay. I actually was I've been visiting a farm for the last several months, and this farm, they have a lot of apples. The production, there's no problem with production. In fact, I think the problem in a lot of places is just that there's too many apples, and that's led to some depressed prices in the processing market. There's two distinct markets for apples. You have your processing market, which is more or less for apple sauces and all that sort of thing, apple juices and all that. And then you have your fresh market apples, which are really the apples that go to the grocery stores. And the market, there's just been so many apples that have been produced that it's really depressed the market for the processing apples, which normally is less of a market than your fresh market anyway. So that's been a struggle. But in terms of Pennsylvania, the apple market is very, very good. There were some issues in New York State, especially the eastern part of the state, and that would have been in May and also the beginning part of June, because we had some very late frost for that part of the country, for that part of the state. So that really affected, that's probably going to bring down some apple production up there. But overall, I think apple production in this region is actually pretty solid for the year.
All right. Well, hopefully those growers can get some more good news as this year goes on. That's Chris Torres, editor of American Agriculturalist. This week's In the Cab with Pioneer takes us to the land of 10,000 lakes. Steve Crouch, a farmer outside Rushford, Minnesota, joins us now. Steve, thanks for talking with us this week.
It's my pleasure.
Tell us, if you would, about GNR Farms, the operation you're a part of.
Well, it's a diverse agriculture. We raise corn, beans, and alfalfa. They have hogs and a dairy, and we run about 6,500 acres, and we furnish feed for the dairy, and the crops, the big share of the corn will go to hogs, have that many hogs.
Can you tell us a little bit, up there in southeast Minnesota, what type of disease and pest pressures do you typically deal with?
The biggest issue we're having today as we talk is tar spot, which this year, because of the conditions, wasn't as much of an issue. Last year it was a huge issue in our area. And the other thing that's a constant issue here is the corn rootworm problem. It seems to be something that's just really, really hard to get a real good handle on.
Yeah, that corn rootworm has been a challenge. How long have you been grappling with it on the operation up there?
I would say the whole time that I've been here, and this is my 36th crop year, you've dealt with it as an issue, way back to the years when come out with Thimet and products like that. Now we're trying to, they still have products, but we're trying to do it through the hybrids, and the newer hybrids that are coming out are constantly helping us.
I understand, Steve, this year you planted some Pioneer Vorseed Enlist corn. How did that perform with regard to corn rootworm pressure?
Well, we did plant a little bit, not a huge amount, but what I've done of it so far has been very good. I mean, it was healthy as can be, stood really good. It really looks like it's going to be, that Vorseed Enlist looks like it's going to be really going to be a boost to us for the different diseases and the corn rootworm, and that's the goal, is to try to get something that helps you and gets better all the time.
Well, that's good to hear, Stephen. Before we let you go, overall, how was the corn harvest over the operation this year?
Well, the harvest has been going well. We had a very, very difficult year. It was really dry. It was one of the, probably since, I might be chuckled at for this, but 1988 was really dry, and this year was a lot the same. The rains that came were sporadic. Some places we get, and we find that in our yields, where we did get just maybe a rain at the right time that helped us, our yields. And overall, our yields have been, we can't complain. I would say they're going to end up being right toward as good as we've ever had.
That's what it's all about. It takes a big team to make these farms successful. Steve Crouch, thank you so much for joining us this week in the Cab with Pioneer.
It's been my pleasure.
There has never been a better time to upgrade your combine, tractor, and grain cart tires. Save up to $300 per tire when you buy 2 or more eligible Firestone Ag radial tires this fall. Visit firestoneag.com for details. It's time to talk markets. Joining us this week is Tommy Grisafi of Advanced Trading. And Tommy, last Thursday saw the release of the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, and USDA says this corn crop's getting bigger, didn't they?
It is, Mike, and I think it's from our friends up north. I looked at the state of North Dakota. I have a lot of clients there, and that's where my office is. And they said they're going to be harvesting long past Thanksgiving. That's not because the bushels aren't there.
That's true. They're going to get what they can get, I suppose. But Tommy, almost a 2-bushel increase month over month from the USDA. Do you think that's sustainable? Are we going to keep this 174.9 bushel yield?
I think we will. I think the bushels came from the fringe states. At Advanced Trade, we work with clients from every state that grows corn, and the fringe states had the better yield. The yields were just average in Illinois, Iowa, Indiana. So we talk the I states, we're in an I state. We think that's where corn's grown. But if you look over the last 100 years, the Corn Belt's exchanged. The Corn Belt has went out so much and changed, and it's something you need to think about, that the technology's better and the Corn Belt's expanded tremendously.
Tommy, so we're growing the corn supply. We've now got, potentially, if it comes to fruition, the biggest corn crop ever produced in this country. Is demand there to keep up with it?
It will be. We noticed we had some really great demand. Demand shows up as the prices go down. Now, the farmer doesn't want to hear that, but they do want to hear the demand's there. They want there to be great demand at higher prices, and that's not always easy to happen. And we did. We had several years of where we had incredible prices and demand. That's very much due to weather problems around the world in the Ukraine war. And Russia's not going to invade Ukraine again. That trade is over.
It is, Tommy. So now that we've got this number out there, what target are you watching for corn prices to maybe catch their breath?
Well, over the next 10 to 12 days, we have December options expiration. And wouldn't be good, but if we pivoted towards that 450, that would rattle some cages and make a whole new level of option strikes that were out of the money become in the money, and people would have to adjust positions. I also think you'd see great demand down there. You'd see countries come in and buy in with both hands.
Tommy, on this corn side, with this corn production coming out of the U.S., will Brazil have the incentive to plant as much corn as they did last year?
I think they're going to plant it no matter what the price. Once you go into production agriculture, it takes a much lower price to get out of production agriculture. And once you have the the inputs bought and everything else, you tend to plant them. It would take a much lower price to knock people out of production ag right now.
All right, so those additional growers are going to be here to stay. Tommy, as we think about that South America production, Brazil is putting their beans in the ground right now. Is the trade up here growing concerned about Brazil's soybean planting pace?
Tremendous volatility due to the weather in South America. One part's too dry, one part's too wet. And we watched that play out, and then we had that big China sale, and it really got the soybean market excited. I think USDA calmed that down a little bit. We're going to get back to trading supply and demand. We will be keeping an eye on weather, though.
We'll be keeping an eye on weather. USDA said soybean yield up 0.3 of a bushel. Does that jive with what you're hearing from growers?
It does. We're still under 50. I think that the inventories are still low enough that it's odd to see the soybean market rally a dollar and watch corn and wheat just stay there. But that's pretty much what we did the last few weeks, Mike.
It is indeed, Tommy. We'll see if this is where it's going to go as we get deeper into November and December. When we come back, let's talk a little bit more about what's happening in the world of soybeans. There has never been a better time to upgrade your combine tractor and grain cart tires. Save up to $300 per tire when you buy 2 or more eligible Firestone Ag radial tires this fall. Visit firestoneag.com for details. And we're talking markets with Tommy Grisafi of Advanced Trading. Tommy, we're reviewing that World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates report. Came out on soybeans, a little bit more production, but as you pointed out earlier, demand seems to be coming back. China stepped in with a big buy. Does the trade think that's going to continue?
It was nice to see. It was needed. We were a little bit behind on sales. It's very much helped us get caught up. I guess the bigger question is, why are they in? If we know Brazil's planting a lot of acres and they have a lot of beans from last year. Of course, we know the problem with Argentina and the soybean meal. So it was a soybean meal-led rally. China came in, scooped up the American beans. It's nice to see that we're competitive. Hopefully we see more.
Hopefully indeed. Tommy, the meal market, are you optimistic about that heading into 2024?
There's a lot of volatility when you watch the actual soybeans trade versus the meal and the oil. Everyone has a reason on why they want to be bullish one or the other. And yet some days you watch, the other day, soybean meal was up almost limit and soybean oil was down half a limit. A big divergence there between the meal and the oil as we crush that bean. Fascinating to watch. Can't always say I understand every trade of every day.
That certainly makes sense, Tommy. There's a lot happening there in the world of markets, and there's a lot happening right now in the world of livestock markets, cattle in particular. After an incredible summer of record prices, it seems as if the sentiment's changed. Is that your take on what's happening?
Yeah, big selling in the pits, but of course there's not the pits. We can't hear the roar. We don't know who's selling. We do know that the price action's very dynamic. A couple months ago, and you reported on your show that the CME group had changed limits in both live cattle and feeder cattle. The last few days, we've actually almost touched those expanded limits, which it's really creating a lot of pain. Now, everyone enjoyed the rally up. Not many people are enjoying the rally down. Of course, there's for every long a short, but cattlemen love high prices.
They do, and cattlemen are long this market, and it is turning against them. Tommy, what's your advice to growers looking at that scenario into 2024? High prices and declining payment for beef.
Yeah, well, it's never been so expensive as to produce a pound of beef as it is today. With interest rates and everything else, you have to be defensive. You may not like what happened to the market, but you have to take the pencil and ask yourself, what if it gets worse? How much more down can I take? Why do I want to go through this pain? I need to set a floor, put a floor in, and move on from there.
Are you looking out into making sales on the livestock side into next year, or do you want to hold on and wait to see what develops?
We do. It's interesting you asked that, Mike. We have some clients who have sold across the whole spectrum of the live cattle and feeder cattle board. They say, I know this is wild. I've never sold this far out. This futures contract just opened. Sell 2, sell 4, sell 10. Unfortunately, the liquidity is not there in the back years.
Okay, so it's really do the best you can with what you've got available.
Correct.
Tommy, we did see the Federal Reserve look to hold interest rates steady here now. Do you think rates are going to climb as we get into this new year?
Well, it's interesting. The 10-year yield hit 5.5. It's down to 4.55, but yet the Fed, Kashkari out of Minneapolis, came out and did some damage control. And even though the 10-year came in like 2 rate cuts, he said we still might raise rates. So stay tuned, my friend. Volatility continues in the interest rate sector.
Volatility continues, and I assume that interest rate sector volatility will reverberate down to the broader economy, Tommy?
You're either making interest or paying interest, my friend.
That is a great point. Tommy Grisafi, we always appreciate your insight when you join us here on This Week in Agribusiness. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here this week.
Thank you, Mike.
Colby Ag Tech is brought to you by Copperhead Ag Products. Visit copperheadag.com for more information. Last week, tech correspondent Chad Colby brought us an update on the newest iPhone. This week, he's got his spotlight on another new product, but it's a little bit bigger.
Did you attend the Farm Progress Show this past year? If you did, you may have heard about Case IH's new Steiger 715. Now, at the Farm Progress Show, they had a place where you could actually go out and drive these tractors yourself and start to experience some of the new enhancements of this new tractor. Now, like many people, including myself, I got a chance to drive the tractor, and you'll notice some of the improvements in shifting quality and how quiet the cab is and the refinements in the cab. But the reality is we're all looking for those efficiencies in the field. And during the tillage demonstrations, of course, people could witness the new tractor in action in the field. And when the demonstrations were over, you could walk up and look at the tractor, of course, talk to the team at Case IH and learn more about it. But the reality is when farmers get home from the Farm Progress Show, the first place they turn to is their local dealership. And in Central Illinois this past week, Michael Schmidt at Central Illinois Ag had the opportunity to have one of these tractors on hand to show to his customers, and I had the opportunity to jump in the cab with Michael and learn a lot more about this tractor and see it firsthand in the field.
This thing is an absolute beast. It accelerates faster, it pulls harder, plug it down to 1400 RPMs, it recovers quickly back up to 2000. We're burning 1.7 gallons an acre, working 17 acres an hour or so, but it's just amazing what this thing can do productivity-wise.
One thing I noticed walking around this tractor with Michael is they just spent a lot of time making sure all those little things were handled, like larger fuel capacity, over 500 gallon, certainly easier to service, it's more efficient, it's faster down the road, so on and so forth. If you got questions, talk to your local Case IH dealership. These tractors are available right away next spring. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Thank you, Chad. I haven't had a chance to ride in the 715 yet, so I really appreciate that view. Folks, leave it here. We'll be back with more This Week in Agribusiness.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Pentair Hypro, a global leader in innovative spray technology for farmers for over 75 years.
Well, it's been a few weeks now since the House of Representatives chose Representative Mike Johnson from Louisiana as their speaker. That opened the door to moving policy along in that chamber. And there's a lot of policy that pertains to agriculture, both crops and livestock. Joining us now to talk through the livestock implications is Ethan Lane. He serves as the Vice President for Government Affairs at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Ethan, thanks for joining us this week.
Great to be with you, Mike.
So we've got appropriations happening on Capitol Hill. Ethan, appropriations were what broke Kevin McCarthy's tenure as Speaker. Speaker Mike Johnson is making progress. Fill us in. What have we seen get accomplished so far in the House?
Well, there's been a little bit of a return to kind of normal business posture on the House side of Capitol Hill since Mike Johnson's election as Speaker. He started literally immediately after his swearing-in ceremony by working through those appropriations bills that have been such a big topic of conversation in the House Republican Conference. We've seen that work continue over the last 10 days or so with, I guess, what you'd call kind of mixed results. They're getting some bills moved across the House floor. Others they've sort of pulled back to kind of retool a little bit. A lot of that still centers on how much cutting can be done to those bills before you start to lose rank and file Republican support. So I'm talking about non-Freedom Caucus members that are saying, hey, we all want to cut the deficit and we all want to cut spending, but we still have priorities at home. We still have constituents with needs, and this goes too far. So they're trying to find that sweet spot on these bills. We've seen a little bit more of a strong hand as far as the open amendment process is kind of the Wild West atmosphere that we saw in September on some of those bills like Agribusiness. And by and large, though, getting some work done. There's 7 bills across the finish line now in the House, working on a few more still this week. with an eye towards that fiscal deadline next week on the 17th for the expiration of the current government funding instrument.
Well, and I think that's my next question, Ethan. It sounds like the House is making progress getting these appropriations bills rolling, but that deadline is next week. What's the expectation in D.C. for what happens when we get to that point?
Well, that's sort of the biggest game in town right now. We're seeing a lot of creative thinking from the House Republican Conference, from Speaker Johnson. They're talking about everything from the clean CR that Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is asking for and basically saying is all that his conference or his caucus will vote for, to this new concept of a laddered CR, which basically takes this big package that all has to pass at once and breaks it up over the course of a few months. The idea there sort of being it's harder to hold the whole process hostage if only partial shutdowns would be impacting folks on a month-by-month basis. I think there's probably some people who look at that and say, oh my gosh, that's worse than what we have now. There are others that can see the utility in looking for some alternative ways to, I guess, take the cards away from the shutdown crowd and try to get this done in a piecemeal way. You know, either way, these bills that are being moved through the House now and their Senate counterparts are effectively DOA in the other chamber, respectively, in the form that they're being passed. The House side, because there's more cuts than the Senate is comfortable with. The Senate side, because a lot of those House side priorities aren't included in the bills. And that means regardless of the progress we see on these bills passing in their individual chambers, it's going to result in some sort of a conference at the end of this process where the leaders of both sides of the appropriations process and the House and Senate leadership generally will get together and figure out what they can all agree on as far as a package that can pass both chambers. So a lot of this is just kind of demonstrating where support lies for different provisions and funding levels before this sort of ultimately larger conversation happens, whether that's now or in January at the expiration of this new CR, if they can get that done. That's kind of the ballgame that we're all watching to see how it shapes up.
All right. So that is happening. We'll continue to watch and see how that develops over this next week in Washington, D.C. Behind all of these appropriations bills, of course, there's still a farm bill that needs to get done at some point in D.C. Ethan, fill us in on where negotiations sit for that piece of legislation right now. Has it been talked about at all since the House got back to work?
Oh, you bet. There's been a lot of conversation. I really focused on the timing of the farm bill. We all know the farm bill that was passed in 2018 expired at the end of September. We're in this sort of post-expiration period where folks feel like there's not going to be any serious impacts to producers and to these programs until the end of the year. So about December 31st is the date that Chairman G.T. Thompson has called out as being kind of the drop-dead date before which we've got to do something, whether that's extending the current farm bill or putting something new in place. There was some talk over the last week that perhaps there'd be some time available on the House floor for Chairman Thompson to move his version of the farm bill through the House of Representatives. It's sounding like that's not the case anymore. Nevertheless, in the background, what we're seeing is that conversation about what an extension looks like. And the most likely scenario there is an extension to the end of the fiscal year. So that'll put us in September of 2024, which of course, nothing going on then, right? Certainly not the very end of a highly contentious presidential cycle and congressional elections and everything else. But that's probably the most likely scenario now. It'll buy ag committee members on both sides of the Hill some time to start working through the details, start comparing notes on the House and Senate versions, and looking for an opportunity to move this larger package. Because one thing we've seen in the last few weeks, this is probably not the environment in the next few weeks to do $1 trillion farm and nutrition bill.
That is a great point, Ethan. There's a lot of differing opinions in Washington, D.C. To this year, just like there is every year. It'll be interesting to see this play out. Thank you, as always, for joining us with your insight from Washington, D.C. Stick around. We'll be back. We'll have more from Max Armstrong and our friends at BASF in a Plan Smart, Grow Smart when we return.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Each year, resistant weeds across the country wreak havoc on farm operations and, it turns out, on farmers' bottom lines. Max had the chance in our most recent Plan Smart, Grow Smart series to talk with Matt Malone at BASF about how they're helping farmers address resistance.
Talk with me about Liberty Ultra.
Well, Liberty Ultra is something that we are very excited to launch here at BASF. This is the result of a lot of R&D, a lot of formulation work, and a lot of development by the aggregate BASF organization. But most importantly, it represents a new tool to the American farmer to address resistant weed pressure.
Let's identify the culprits, those resistant weeds.
Most farmers would probably tell you some of their biggest weeds are things like kochia, giant ragweed, or Palmer amaranth. But I would say public enemy number one from a resistant weed standpoint today is still probably water hemp for many farmers across the country. Fortunately, BASF has a host of different offerings today that continue to be effective. Things like our residual portfolios in the form of Zidua and Outlook herbicides, as well as our knockdown offerings like Ingenia and Liberty. And starting in the season of 2024, we're going to be excited to offer Liberty Ultra as a new tool to address that very pest.
Those problematic weeds, if a grower doesn't control them, what are we talking about in terms of potential damage to the crop and the yield potential?
Every farmer's probably got a different number in mind, but the Weed Science Society of America has suggested that as much as 52.1% of top-line yield is at risk just from resistant weeds, particularly in late-season pressure scenarios. Maybe to put that into a dollar figure amount, that's as much as $16 billion in value that's at risk every single season due to resistant weed pressure.
What are some of the factors that growers should take into consideration when they're looking at the herbicide product to control this kind of pressure?
It's important to look at weed control the way you would look at any other problem on your farm and having a variety of solutions at your disposal to address it. One of the nice things about a product like Liberty herbicide, though, is that it has a very uniform applicability across trait platforms. Whether using a Liberty Link, Enlist E3, or XtendFlex soybean acre, you can still use Liberty on that acre to get outstanding weed control against particularly those resistant weeds we were just talking about.
How is Liberty Ultra different than Liberty herbicide?
Liberty today is already an outstanding weed control offering, but Liberty Ultra does find a way to improve on that almost perfect control that we see out of Liberty in a lot of cases today. Liberty Ultra also features Glue-L technology, which is a proprietary process that refines the active ingredient from Liberty herbicide to reduce our use rate by about 25%. That means that the American farmer is going to get the same punch with 24 ounces of Liberty Ultra that they're used to getting with a 32-ounce rate of Liberty herbicide.
That's a huge story.
It's a huge story in terms of convenience, it's a huge story in terms of weed control, but ultimately it's a huge story and a win for BASF and the American farmer to finally have a new tool in that post-trait-enabled acre on soybeans, cotton, corn, and of course canola.
Thank you, Max, for that update. And folks, if you'd like to see all the videos in our Plan Smart, Grow Smart series, visit the website, plansmartgrowsmart.com.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
Well, it's time to take a look at the forecast. Meteorologist Greg Solier joins us now. And Greg, Pacific Northwest in line for some snow this next week?
Yeah, and more, at least lower elevation rain. We had snows last week down to around 6,500 to 7,000 feet across the Cascades and the Rockies. So, yeah, some additional moisture there, as well as the valley locales and as far south as northern sections of California. Not a major system, but a myriad of these things beginning to come ashore. The jet stream pattern continuing to walk and talk like a moderate to strong El Nino setup, as we have been talking about here for weeks and months gone by. Upstream here, you get, well, dry weather, mild weather, and windy weather as well. So additional firming and drying as some of the feedlots here across the Dakotas and southern Canadian Prairie. Later in the week, one weather system hightails it up into the central Canadian Prairie. A little rain snow mix here. Gusty winds continue on. Couple of rain showers, would you believe? Bismarck, Mandan down to east of the Black Hills. It's cool off slated across the interior west. And another weather system offshore, northern California, with another round of good coverage, rain and snow levels down to around 6,000 or 7,000 feet with that particular weather system across the Cascades over the middle to late portions of the week. The main mother lode of all this continuing to be anchored offshore of California here early in the week, and a couple of rain showers across Napa and points on northward, a few sprinkles and snowflakes in through New Mexico, downslope winds across the central and southern plains. Yeah, the dryness and drought through Kansas in particular, but we have some good news as we get closer here in the next 7 to 10 days. Meanwhile, later into the week. Look at the rain and thunderstorm activity. That's certainly an El Nino setup, and more to come through a very wet and soggy California forecast here for the next couple of weeks. Snows across the central and southern Rockies, and ultimately the wind and warmth across the central and southern plains replaced by, with time, by some showers and thunderstorms.
Well, Greg, that warmth has moved across the Corn Belt here. Is that going to bring some more weather with it next week?
It will, but one more little clipper system making its way. Generally quiet, dry, benign setup. A couple of flakes and sprinkles around the Great Lakes region. Chill in the air up towards the Sioux and points on northward. Otherwise high pressure and a nice turnaround in temperature readings, increasing southeast to south winds across the plains. And so opportunities for outdoor work. We're certainly well ahead of the game, if not wrapped up on harvest here. Still a bit delayed through Michigan as well as Ohio. But as the week wears on, it's high pressure control, moderating temperatures. We should be able to get a lot done here in the northern and eastern Corn Belt western sections, feeling more like almost late September or October as warmth continues to build across areas of the northern and central plains. Perhaps even record-setting levels expected from about Nebraska on southward. We do have this weather system down across areas of western Texas. Did have some rain last week across some of the worst drought areas of Texas and Louisiana. Some additional scattered showers and thunderstorms there with a cool off over the desert southwest. Look at how the jet stream buckles across the west with desert thunderstorm activity and cooler air mid to late portions of the week. A windy warm up for much of the plains. And we have maybe a hybrid system here, Mike, which may be tropical, extratropical, in any event, some additional welcome rains for parts of Texas and down through Louisiana later on into the week.
Greg, do you see any of that action moving all the way to the East Coast?
It will with time. That system making its way through the northern and eastern Corn Belt locales. A little reminder of the season. No big deal. Flakes and sprinkles, and that's about it. Windy weather for the northeast and New England. Pretty quiet down to the Ohio Valley. And here's the corridor where some of the leftover significant corn harvest needs to be complete. Back west of the Mississippi, plenty of opportunity for outdoor work, and another big warm-up slated here. Temperatures 10-15 degrees above average. A lot of wind as well. A couple of sprinkles and snowflakes on the northbound warm front and a milder push of air into the northeast New England. So a very delightful, certainly typical El Nino setup continues on across much of the east and the Corn Belt as well. Active weather pattern across the Gulf Coast. One weather system making its way out of Florida, another one down through Texas. And looky here, the waters are still warm. It's still tropical weather season. We may see a little hybrid development here across the Gulf Coast and points out of the east with a pickup on showers and thunderstorms mid to late portions of the week. Otherwise, another cool down coming off some of the recent 80-degree weather across the Carolinas. High pressure for the Tennessee Valley. Windy, warm weather back across areas of the southern plains. So other than that, there looks to be a pretty active weather pattern for the Gulf Coast. Otherwise, much of the Tennessee Valley in good shape.
Greg Soye is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
Greg Soye joins us now with a look ahead. Greg, next week you mentioned we are going to see some precipitation. Where's it going to fall?
It will fall across areas of the deep south, the southeastern sections of the country in particular, Gulf Coast areas. And this is good news coming off, what has just been a mighty tough drought pattern here through Texas, down through Louisiana, the Gulf Coast areas. Of course, during the height of the tropical season, couldn't get anything going down there. And that hot ridge at times was anchored in this part of the country. Well, looky here, this system and another one coming across the Rio Grande. There may be some significant rains as the week wears on down across this particular part of the country. Early in the week, some quarter-inch moisture up into parts of the northeast and New England. This is a little bit overdone, but towards the following weekend, we'll get into this. Good part of the week ahead for the Corn Belt, particularly northern and eastern areas in great shape. And the same with the western complex. Look at the west, though, from about the high plains to the divide all the way to the Pacific coast, anywhere from a half inch to maybe an inch or two or even 3 into parts of California. Mike, it is the start and vanguard to a very busy and El Nino active weather pattern out there and points to the east.
Well, Greg, the week after that is a busy one here, as it is the Thanksgiving week. What do you expect to see?
No real Arctic air in sight. First of all, just a little troughiness across the northwestern part of the country. The at least eastern extent of that powerful jet stream making its way across the Pacific Thanksgiving Day on the 23rd. And looks like basically from the Mississippi on eastward, we ought to be in good travel mode during the holiday. Probably a little more active weather shaping up. We'll take a look at in a second. Below average readings over the southeastern part of the country, but plenty of warmth enough opportunities to get out, get for the walk going after dinner or before dinner, and maybe throw the pigskin around as well. No super cold air in sight, but it's this active pattern from southwest to northeast, and we'll see weather systems on the move, and there'll be a propensity here, especially late in the holiday weekend, to get some additional moisture going for the heart of the Corn Belt, the Plain States, primarily through the Corn Belt. Wet weather is same with the desert southwest. Over the southeastern part of the country, moisture will be below average. So mild weather pattern, but a busy one for the heartland towards the holiday.
Greg, does that ridge of warm air stay into place through the first couple days of December?
Really nothing feeling like December. It will kind of temporarily retrograde back to the west. Fragment event. We go a little bit of a dip in the jet stream here with a little reminder that it is meteorological winter time. Slightly below average readings for the Sioux up into the northeast and New England. Warmth down here across the Gulf Coast and across the western part of the country. Weather pattern a little more active, but this time shifting northward. Pacific Northwest, Northern Plains, Northern and Eastern Corn Belt into the northeast and New England. Pretty quiet weather pattern over the central and southern reaches of the country.
The week of December 4th. Greg, what do you expect?
Temperature-wise here, no real Arctic air in sight. We have this particular setup, the warm ridge over the eastern part of the country. The southern branch of the jet lets loose again, so readings a bit below average from about the high plains areas on westward, and it looks to be another busy one for, again, areas of the west from about the Rockies on westward. Pretty quiet weather pattern for the last field work across the Mississippi Valley on eastward.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
It is a reality of tractor restorations. You will spend more, I predict, than originally planned. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Mystic Lubricants. Mystic Lubricants are made to make it last. Well, Jim Gorsney shared with me the numbers on a tractor restoration, but a superb restoration, a 1970 IH 1456. He said I was like $28,000 for the initial restoration, then maybe another $4,000 or $5,000 to really bring it to life. And you can see here, he did a superb restoration of that tractor. Now, some of the purists among us might quarrel with his plow choice. They might say, oh, well, shouldn't it be red also? No, it's a beautiful Oliver green 5-bottom plow, actually a little bit older than the tractor. It was made in 1966. The tractor made in 1970. And Jim made sure that that plow was painted superbly and decaled properly. It was probably Jim Gorsney's intent to have a tractor and plow combination that would turn heads and make folks say, take a look at that. And I'm sure many of them are responding that way when they see his IH tractor and its companion Oliver plow at Oregon, Illinois. Well, let's see what's going to be moving over the block at Big Iron Auctions here. Here's our friend Mark Stock with his weekly report.
Hi, Max. Big Iron has a marketplace classified ad section. If you've got items you would like to sell and you want to utilize this marketplace and expose your equipment to thousands of people, contact your area rep for more information. Now we have late model combines, corn heads, and draper heads on the marketplace on bigiron.com. If you're looking for collectible toys, new in the box, Big Iron will sell a lot of toys for several estates on Monday, November the 13th. Big Iron Auctions and Sullivan Auctioneers will be selling a tremendous amount of real estate over the next couple weeks. In fact, just under 9,000 acres will sell in November and December. Land in Illinois, Missouri, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, just to name a few of the states. On Wednesday, November the 15th, 1,599 items will be sold from 132 different sellers. Ralph and Betty Erickson will be selling their 2003 John Deere 7320 mechanical front tractor with a loader. Telus Equipment Solutions from Taft, Texas will sell a 2014 John Deere 8370 RT track tractor and a John Deere 8335 RT track tractor. Max, please visit the Big Iron and Sullivan Auctioneers websites for all the great land and equipment that will sell in the next few weeks.
Our FFA Chapter Tribute is brought to you by Pioneer, developing new generations of seed innovations for new generations of farmers. Pioneer, what's next happens here. And now it's time to meet that next generation of agricultural leaders. This week, we're talking with Kayla Poling. She serves as the Southeast Area Vice President for the Oklahoma State FFA. Kayla, thanks for talking with us this week.
Thanks for having me.
If you would, tell us a little bit about the agriculture around where you grew up in Durant, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I'd love to. So in Southeast Oklahoma, as far as production agriculture goes, outside of some cow-calf operations and a little bit of ranching, is mostly timber production, or even there's some pecan orchards in Southeast Oklahoma.
It is a diverse agriculture when you get to that part of the country. And I'm curious, as you look at your next year of service, what are you excited about working with all of these different folks connected to agriculture?
I think the most exciting thing is working with the members. Young FFA members are so passionate about this organization and the opportunities within it, and it always reminds you of maybe when you were in 8th grade, or just seeing the spark that young people have for the future. And I think that's just so amazing. And getting to go to these leadership conferences and seeing new ideas and new perspectives, I always feel as if I'm learning way more than what the students are.
That is fantastic. And Kayla, will you be in school during your year of service?
Yes, I'm a current student at Oklahoma State University. I'm actually in my dorm right now. I'm majoring in animal science, and I can't wait to see where the rest of the year goes.
Well, that is fantastic. Kayla Poling, Southeast Area Vice President with the Oklahoma State FFA. We wish you the best of luck this year and with your career.
Thank you. Thank you.
When we're looking for information on what's happening in the world of agriculture, one of our most favorite sources are farm broadcasters. They're plugged in to what's happening on the ground. And before we go for the day, I wanted to check in with Joe Gill. He's the farm director in Albany, Minnesota at KASM Radio. Joe, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Always great to visit. Thanks for the invitation.
Joe, East Central Minnesota, of course, is where you're located. Bring us up to speed. How far along are we in harvest in your neck of the woods?
You know, in our area, Mike, it's pretty unique because I'd say in the last 3 to 5 days, I've seen the most grain trucks and grain carts than I've seen, in the last 2 to 3 weeks. We had a span where a lot got done, I think, in early October. We did see a little winter weather. We saw some of that rain we didn't see all summer. That delayed it. Now we're just seeing kind of the back end getting cleaned up in corn. Some folks unable to get the soybeans after that little bit of winter weather we saw in October.
Well, Joe, you did get some snow there after a very hot season. Are growers generally pleased with yield results so far?
They're like poker players. They won't tell me numbers in most cases, but everybody is, when it comes to corn, they're pleasantly surprised. They say it was way better than what they figured. Soybeans, they said they're disappointed, but I've been trying to get some numbers and they hold them so close to the vest. I haven't seen any new trucks driving out and about yet, but I think they're happy where they are.
All right, Joe. Well, in addition to being the farm director there at KASM Radio, you're also serving as president of the National Association of Farm Broadcasters. Your annual convention is next week. Are you looking forward to getting together with all your broadcasters again?
This should be an outstanding week. It's our 80th convention. So just to think back 80 conventions and celebrate this week. And, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of work, but there also is some entertainment and some fun. As already right now, over 700 of our members are registered for this year's convention. And we have a lot of great sessions, a lot of great days. It should be a memorable event this year for all members again.
Joe, 80 years of NAFB, and we've got some challenges now with AM radio going forward. Can you tell us what the bill is that NAFB is encouraging folks to check out to keep AM radio strong?
Yes, the bill is the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act. Now, there's a version in the House and the Senate, so therefore you're thinking, that's good, right? Yes, it is. We're seeing a lot of bipartisan support. And each and every day, we see new representation sign on in support of these bills. And a lot of folks want to see action maybe today or tomorrow. But as you're well aware, there's a lot going on in the scope of our government and D.C., but I feel pretty optimistic about it.
All right, folks, if you want to keep AM radio in those vehicles, check that out. AM Radio in Every Car Act. Joe Gill, NAFB president this year, thanks so much for filling us in.
Thanks, Mike.
A few weeks ago, we had the chance to tour Crooked Creek Beef, and we shared that here on the program. While we were on that farm, we had the chance to explore a second ag operation. Tucked into a building on the corner of the Crooked Creek property sits Earth Angel Mushrooms. This was a company started by T.R. Davis back in 2014. When the company was first formed, their specialty was growing oyster mushrooms. Over time, they began to build a reputation in the mushroom community as a quality provider of substrate. That's what's being packaged right here. This is the material that the mushrooms grow in. TR said that as their substrate business started to grow in 2019, they retooled Earth Angel away from mushroom production into substrate production, and they have been selling these blocks, they call them, to mushroom producers around the country. Then in 2020, when coronavirus broke out, they decided they need another challenge. The folks at Earth Angel Mushrooms decided to become growers of maitake mushrooms. These are a very complex mushroom to grow, and it took several years for the company to get everything hammered out correctly, but they're in production right now. We had the chance to tour these storage rooms where the mushrooms fruit, that is, grow, as we would say, and we could see them really stretching all over the place. These maitake mushrooms are prized in the food service community, and Earth Angel is consistently sold out, selling their maitake mushrooms around the country, and they ship via Southwest Air. It was a fascinating look at a production practice that was new to me, and I hope you found it interesting as well. Folks, next week, Max Armstrong will be back here in the studio, so do be sure to join us next time, right here, for more This Week in Agribusiness.
This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.